I'm Blake McCabe. I'm going to be presenting to you about death and dying in Judaism, burial practices, denominational divisions, and the pandemic. I'm a PhD student at SUNY Binghamton University, where I completed my master's in linguistic anthropology. My current research is on the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on American Jewish communal practice. I'm happy to be presenting to you for this year's Anthropology Archaeology Week, with the theme being human dignity. So I have a dual role in this. I'm both an academic researcher and I am a Chevra Kadisha member, which I'll explain what that is in a bit. So I get to provide for you both the edict, the outsider perspective, and the emic, the insider perspective. I am an educator. I'm a full-time high school social studies teacher, a current researcher, and I used to be the educational coordinator for a community synagogue school, board of trustees member, and ritual committee member. Notes on continuity and change. So whenever you're studying a minority group that is a living, breathing minority group, it's important to know that often when we read research about them, that is just showing a snippet in time. We can't look at that and say, well, this is how they are today, and not accept the change. This often happens when we're doing research on a group we're unfamiliar with. We look up at the research, and you have to make sure you look at the time. If it's published in 1979, that only tells you about the group in 1979 and prior. The past does inform the present, but we have to recognize change, global dependencies, and internal differences. These could be internal, meaning denominational, ethnic, or other divisions. For looking at Judaism, we need to understand today that there are two types of splits. There's cultural, which is mostly Ashkenazi, Jews descending from Central and Eastern Europe, Sephardi, which are Jews originating in places like Spain and Italy, eventually going to Turkey after the expulsion, and it's North Africa. But also there are groups like Mizrahi groups from the Middle East and North Africa that never were part of the European communities. In addition, there are denominational divisions. So we often think of traditional being orthodoxy, which includes regular Orthodox, modern Orthodox, Yeshivish, Chabad, Hasidic, Haredi, and dozens within that. Conservative Judaism, unrelated to politics, it means to conserve tradition. Reform, so to reform, Reconstructionist, humanistic, and there's multiple other groups as well. For my research, the sites I used are Zoom, live stream platforms, in person in the synagogue sanctuary, cemeteries, homes, and as well as funeral based. And we're going to talk about how this is all done in relationship to death and dignity in Judaism. My data sources are my own research, which is a three-phase longitudinal study that looked first at conservative Judaism in New York and then expanded across the United States to all denominations, as well as Ashkenazi versus Sephardi. It was a national COVID-19 survey, included many different topics, but that also includes funerary practices. I also look at historical records of practices and literary texts, both religious and non-religious, as well as we're going to talk about autoethnography, so researching my own group and the lived experience. The theoretical framework to understand Jewish practices is not all-inclusive, but good ones to start at are Durkheim and his discussion of anomie, which is normlessness, collective effervescence, often used to discuss religious rituals. Van Gennep and Turner, so liminality, which is a phase that's transitionary, and the concept of the good death as a rite of passage. So if we look at preliminal, living, liminal, the death ritual, and postliminal, which is mourning or memory. So we'll start with my autoethnography to give you that insider emic perspective. So I'm going to go through some images. You'll notice there are no images of actual bodies, and the only gravesite image is of my own family because I want to respect privacy. I was given permission to take the pictures that I have, and it's important whenever you're studying a group, particularly a group you're not part of, and something as personal as death, that you respect their views on this. And that is more than just dignity for an individual, it's dignity for minority groups especially. So this is the image of the box that includes the linens that we're going to use to dress those who are deceased. All right, so let's start with somebody passes away and they're Jewish. There are many different traditions today about in Judaism for preparing the dead. The one I'm going to tell you about is done in the conservative Jewish community, and it is not universal to all conservative Jewish communities. We are very based in what's called minhag, which means tradition or custom. And as groups move around the world, their traditions are going to change. So we have to remember things are not monolithic, but we are going to see a lot of similarities in the conservative and the Orthodox traditions around death. So the first one is when somebody dies, we believe that the soul does not leave from the body. It's still nearby and it can hear and feel everything done around it into the body. And it can't move on until a point where it can accept its death, which is the completion of the burial ritual. So once somebody is discovered as deceased, we treat the body as if the living soul is still around. So that means treating it with the same respect you would treat it as a living being. We don't pass items over the dead body, just as you wouldn't pass something right over someone's face and invade their personal space. Men do not touch the women's bodies as well, particularly in Orthodoxy, because of modesty rules. Once we are ready to prepare the body for death, for burial, we have a number of rituals. Some communities, until they are ready to prepare, will have what are called shomrim guards that stay with the body and again talk to the person. My community does not use that, but we still maintain the practice of burying as quickly as possible. So once we are ready to prepare the body, we approach the body with respect. We talk to the person, we apologize for any mistakes we could possibly make. We clean the body using mildly soapy water and soft cloths. We'll start with multiple people working together, head, feet, arms, all parts of the body, keeping the private areas covered except when we have to wash them. We will clip the nails. You see a nail clipper there, clean under the fingernails. We will even give them a little manicure where we will smooth out the edges. Any nail clippings, hair that falls out, or blood, we try to keep in a biodegradable baggie that will be buried with the body because they're considered part of the body. After we wash the hair, we brush it as carefully as we can. We remove any makeup, nail polish. If they have full fake nails, we often can't remove those. If somebody has an implanted medical device, we don't touch that. We'll remove any band-aids and repair the body. We try to talk as little as possible unless we have to, and we do it with very, very calm, quiet voices. There are no small talk, right? We are giving this person our entire attention. Once we are ready to prepare the body for going in the casket, which in America is a plain pine box. In Israel, it's directly into the ground with just the cloths. We use linen cloths. These are examples of them. Some communities have slight differences. For example, some have no pants on the bottom and just a dress. Some have multiple head and face coverings. I am just showing you the ones that we use in my community. So the left image shows the entire part. I didn't open and unroll them because these are ones that are going to be used someday and I wanted to keep them in good condition. So we'll first try to get the big garment on. So that's the pants, which it is very difficult to move and lift a dead body. And that's why we have multiple people. We want to do this in a respectful manner. So we put the pants on, we'll put the shirt or the dress on over that, which is in the second picture. Then we're going to cover with their hair and in their face. Men will get an additional hair covering. Women sometimes get an additional shroud. And then we have to place the body into the casket. Before we do, underneath the pillow, we will place a packet, which you see on the right says Holy Earth from Mount Olives, Jerusalem, Israel. If you are not buried in Israel, you will have dirt from Israel placed in the casket with you. Then we close the casket and we will prepare for the funeral. The burial process is done very quickly from death, but the burial process itself is both for the family and for the deceased. So the family is never involved in the burial preparations of the body, and they are not supposed to know who is on the Chevra Kadisha. The Chevra Kadisha is an organization that means holy friends. Some people view it secretively, but it's really not meant to be. It's just meant to be confidential because we're not looking for gratitude from the families. So our goal is to ensure the family knows their loved one is cared for in a respectful manner. So there's usually a phone chain to set it up. Then people will come to take the casket to the graveside, just like in most communities in the US, and the burial will practices will occur. So how is the actual funeral conducted? So the body will be lowered and there will be a number of prayers done, just like in Christianity as well. But here is what's unique to Judaism. We want to participate in the burial of our loved ones. It's our last good deed we can do for them. So we will have the mound of dirt and we'll take a shovel backwards because we don't want to have to bury them, right? It's a sad thing. So we do it backwards and place a little bit of dirt and then we flip it right way and we do it 2 more times. Some communities do more, some do less. We start from the closest family member and work our way through everyone who's there who wants to do it. After that, in America, typically, then the people who run the cemetery take over. But in some communities, it will continue this way. Once the burial is done, we have what's called Shiva, coming from the word Sheva, meaning 7. So it's the 7 initial days of mourning, and we have a meal of consolation. The family is meant to be able to sit in their grief. They shouldn't have to think about worldly needs. So the rest of the community will come around and bring food they made. They'll even serve them at the table. And then we spend the rest of the time discussing memories of the person. Now the person is buried. We now focus on the family. This creates dignity both for the person deceased and for the family themselves. A year after ends the full mourning, and this is when we place the headstone. As you can see here, this is my great-grandparents' headstone in Queens, New York, in a Jewish cemetery. And you'll notice at the top some rocks. In order to build the memory of the person, instead of placing flowers, we place rocks to build their memorial. Because we believe it's not just done when our mourning is done, that if you do good deeds to remember the person who died, you're actually uplifting them in death, which is another form of dignity. This became a big issue during the pandemic when people couldn't attend funerals in person, when they couldn't do the actual putting the dirt on the grave, and they couldn't have their mourning rituals together. And we had to find new ways to create this meaningful experience in a healthy and safe way while we're maintaining dignity. And so this brings me to comparing overall baseline and the research. So baseline practices are based on Talmud, which is an ancient Babylonian Jewish Aramaic language text from 2,000 years ago, as well as customs that have evolved throughout the 2,000 years, which is why there's differences between the ones that each ethnic group does. For the denominational divisions, Orthodox Judaism emphasizes tradition and law. There are laws around burial, but the majority are tradition, but tradition informs everything they do. In conservative Judaism, while they are very close to a lot what Orthodoxy does for burial, overall they do adjust to modernity. So, for example, they may drive on the Sabbath. And they're the ones more apt to use digital methods for traditional practices. Reform Judaism moves farther away from those traditional practices, and while they enjoy traditions, they focus on the traditions that make sense for the community. If the community doesn't see that as making sense, falls under the things that make Jewish weird phrase, they often will not do that. They sometimes use a Chevra Kadisha and sometimes do not. The biggest differences are in Reconstructionist and humanistic Judaism. Reconstructionist Judaism may not do the traditional burial practices at all. They do not necessarily believe in the concept of the spirit being attached to the body. But they still will follow many of those traditions as they are customs as opposed to laws. And that's the idea that we're a civilization with customs. Humanistic Judaism, which is called God optional, but for the most part avoids God speak in their practices, they allow things like cremation, which are considered extremely taboo, particularly for Orthodox and conservative Judaism. Reform Judaism officially does not allow it either, but humanistic Judaism will allow it. And the difference here is the idea they don't believe in the supernatural. So there's not that concept of the soul feeling what's happening to the body. And it's more about what the remaining family members want. What is dignity for them in this liminal phase? So I mentioned a little bit about the COVID-19 impacts. So mediated mourning, who counts as there? So in Judaism, we have a number of practices, particularly going from Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox and up, that require 10 adult human beings present that are Jewish. I say human beings because it's not the same for all. Orthodoxy, it has to be men. Conservative and Reform, they'll accept women. And part of that includes saying the mourner's Kaddish, which is the prayer for people in mourning, first said at the funeral. The saying this on a yearly basis in certain holidays is also providing people a dignified space to express that mourning doesn't just end. We always will have some sadness for that person. And it's also to elevate the soul of the deceased. And with the requirement of being in person, this became very difficult during the pandemic. While some made exceptions, particularly Reform Judaism, to allow virtual presence, conservative Judaism, my research showed it depended on communities. Orthodoxy did not allow the minyan. You had to have an in-person minyan, and then somebody could be on Zoom during the week and say the Amen at the end of the prayer and have that count. But there still had to be 10 people in person doing it. Communities use the profane, things like technology, to make something to make become sacred in times of crisis. So historically, using things like Zoom would not have been common, even when it was more common in our lives, even before Zoom, right? We had Skype. Very few communities were using this for ritual services. A famous example that did was the Park Avenue Synagogue. They were one of the first big synagogues to begin using it. But the pandemic created a time of crisis where people had to reinvent their practices and what's meaningful. So this is what we mean by something profane becoming a part of the sacred. Now, my research focused primarily on denominational divisions. The Ashkenazi Sephardi divide is not huge when it comes to burial practices, but there are some custom differences. And we don't know what the true long-term impacts are of the pandemic on funeral practices. We have seen some amazing things happen. For example, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, she was Jewish. And they put a call out for Shomrim, those guards to watch the body, on Zoom. They had thousands of people respond willing to do it. It shows the impact of an individual and the desire to provide that dignity. Because when you give to the dead can't ever thank you. It's the ultimate, I want to provide this person's dignity and their transition through this liminal time. Respondents in research do describe the virtual prayers as meaningful, but many felt they wanted that return to in person. That normlessness during the pandemic, the enemy, where it made it so that the collective effervescence was not as meaningful. But it was still something that people found as a way to create meaning in a time of enemy. Post-pandemic, people have started to incorporate these more, but the Orthodox groups have returned primarily to in person with using technology mostly for things like education. Communities adjusted to constraints while preserving tradition. And the COVID liminality reframes the way we look at the good death, and we have now a new norm for this. So a reminder that I employ both emic and edict. So talking about those anthropological theories, that is an edict perspective. Even though I'm Jewish, even though I'm part of a conservative Jewish community, I cannot tell you the full emotions and perspectives of every Jewish denominational and cultural group. It is important when we do research on something as significant as death practices that we really try to emphasize the focus and the narrative of those who are the emic perspective. We must always remember that cultures evolve and change. The past informs, but they're not stagnant, and this includes for death rituals. Cultures are not homogenous, particularly ones that are international. Good death equals respect for the dying, the dead, the family, and the community. Even if you don't believe in the customs, what you're studying, if you are studying something like death or attending a death ritual, and the community believes something supernatural about it, we must respect that. Liminality, which is a transitional state, both the pandemic itself was liminal and death itself are liminal spaces. Collective effervescence is not just about joy when it comes to religious practices, but there can be joy in sad moments. It's about bringing family and communities together to create meaning and connections. Human dignity for the dying, the dead, and those that remain, especially during times of normlessness. If you are interested in further research, I am completing my PhD on the impact of the pandemic on American Jewish communal practices. I'm looking throughout their practices on education, on funerary practices, life cycle events in general, as well as just the daily practices and how it has changed since the pandemic. Feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Blake McCabe. I am a PhD student at SUNY Binghamton University. I've also worked there as both an adjunct and instructor of record for many years. I started as an adjunct in Judaic studies in 2019, and since then have been an instructor of record for many classes. I am also a high school social studies teacher, and I teach comparative religion. My email, if you would like to reach out, is B, as in the first initial of my name, McCabe, as in my last name, the number 3, at binghamton.edu. Thank you.